Jesus said, "Man cannot live on bread alone, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." You're listening to Daily Truth.
Just like two pedals on a bicycle, so in the Christian life we have assurance and sanctification. Assurance and sanctification. Sanctification is the lifelong process of being made righteous. Okay? Justification, using some theological terms here, so I want to define them. Justification is the moment, not a process, the moment of being declared righteous. In justification, God declares us righteous and slams the gavel, as it were, and says that by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ and his finished work, you are righteous. It is what we would also theologically refer to as positional righteousness, a perfect and completed righteousness. But there is progressive righteousness, positional justification, declared righteous, progressive sanctification, the process of being made righteous. Now that process of growing in Christ likeness, being further and further conformed to the image of the Son, progressively being made holy, going from glory to glory throughout the Christian life, that process will not occur at all. It will be entirely and utterly stunted if there is no assurance of salvation. Because the process of sanctification involves obedience. Growing in holiness, if anything, is the lifelong process of growing in obedience. But God's love for us in the gospel of Jesus Christ is the fuel for our obedience. In fact, I would argue that there is no true obedience outside of that. The unbeliever can outwardly obey. The unbeliever can do certain things, both in their word and deed, that outwardly align with the moral law of God. And yet, their righteousness is as filthy rags. Why? Because they don't have the proper motive. When the unbeliever obeys outwardly, it is never an obedience of the heart. It is never motivated out of love for God. And it is not motivated out of love for God precisely because they have not been loved by God. And if they are God's elect and have been loved by God, they have not yet been converted, namely an unbeliever. They have not yet been converted, and so they have not yet been given spiritual eyes to see, spiritual ears to hear, a new heart in order to know and experience God's love for them. So how are we sanctified? We grow in obedience. How do we grow in obedience? Well, we grow in love for God. Love for God is what fuels our obedience. And how do we grow in love for God? 1 John 4:19. We love because he first loved us. Meaning that as we come to see, chiefly in the cross, in Christ, as we come to see more and more of God's love for us, we grow in love for him. And as we grow more and more in our love for him, we grow in obedience. What does Jesus say? If you love me, you'll obey me. So who obeys Jesus? Those who love Jesus. And who loves Jesus? Those who have been loved by Jesus. If you love me, you'll obey me. And we love because he first loved us. So what causes us to be sanctified, to grow in obedience, to grow in Christ's likeness? Loving God. And what causes us to grow in our love for God? His love for us. But what happens in the life of a Christian, even if they are truly and objectively born again, if they have no sense of confidence in God's love for them? Well, then they have no fuel for loving him back and obeying Him. And a vicious cycle begins where all of a sudden what happens, here's the cycle, here's how these two elements play off of one another. If I'm not assured of God's love for me, I'll have little to no motivation to love Him in return and therefore obey Him, which means I will be disobedient. I will be lacking in obedience. And if I lack obedience to God, well, what does that look like? What is a life of someone who lacks obedience to God? What does that look like? It looks like someone who hasn't been loved by God. It looks like an unbeliever. So if I'm not assured of my salvation, I won't be motivated to be sanctified. And if I'm not sanctified, all the more I'll begin to question my assurance of salvation. If I'm not being sanctified, if I'm not growing spiritually, then I have great cause to doubt whether or not I've ever been spiritually born. Someone who does not spiritually grow, one of the most likely explanations for that predicament is I'm not spiritually growing because perhaps I haven't been spiritually born. You have to be born first to grow. So if I'm not growing, maybe I haven't been born again, spiritually born. I need the assurance of salvation to motivate sanctification, to fuel sanctification. And I need sanctification to further confirm assurance. I'll say it again. Assurance fuels sanctification. Sanctification confirms assurance. Assurance fuels sanctification. Sanctification confirms assurance.
Wait. Real quick, before you go, do me a favor. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell so you'll be notified with all our new content as it comes out on a daily basis. And if you're willing to support this ministry, you can do so by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. Thanks so much. God bless.